Before the splits, before the kicks, before the thunder of applause, there was a boy. Skinny, nearsighted, mocked. A child named Jean-Claude Camille François van Varenberg, born October 18, 1960 in Berchem, St. Agathe, a quiet suburb of Brussels. His father, Eugene, an accountant, kept order with numbers. His mother, Ileana, a florist, filled their modest home with color. His sister, Veronique, was his only companion. But inside Jean-Claude, a storm was already brewing. He was small, fragile, bullied for his glasses, dismissed for his frame. 4 eyes, they called him. Too weak, they said, but humiliation did not break him. It built him. At age 11, he stared into a mirror and made a vow, not to be famous, not to be rich, but to be strong. Strong enough to silence the laughter. Strong enough to rewrite the ending. His father sensed the fire and enrolled him at the Centre National de Karaté under Master Claude Goetz. For 4 brutal years, Jean-Claude trained until discipline became his second skin. At 18, he earned a black belt in Shotokan karate and joined Belgium's national team. But strength alone was not enough. He chose ballet. 5 relentless years at the bar, forging balance, grace, and endurance beyond imagination. Ballet is the hardest, he would say later. If you can survive a ballet workout, you can survive anything. To complete the transformation, he turned to bodybuilding, reshaping the frail boy into a figure of steel. In 1978, he claimed the title of Mr. Belgium, but the trophies meant little compared to what he had won inside belief. Around age 12, one restless night, he walked alone into a church and whispered 3 impossible wishes to save the world, to protect nature, and to become a movie star. Naive, perhaps, but to a lonely boy desperate for light, they were lifelines. These early battles, heartbreaking, cruel, yet strangely beautiful, etched themselves into his soul. From a small Belgian parish to the unforgiving mirrors of a dance studio, from bruised pride to black belt discipline, Jean-Claude Van Damme was already rehearsing for the greatest fight of his life. Not against an enemy on screen, but against the darkness within and the world's brutal certainty that he would never be enough. In 1982, Jean-Claude Van Damme stepped off a plane in Los Angeles with $3,000 in his pocket, a broken accent, and a dream that burned brighter than any spotlight. Hollywood was a galaxy away, and he was just another anonymous immigrant staring at a city that didn't care if he lived or died. He slept in the backseat of a beat-up car, upholstery torn, windows fogged with breath, stomach twisting with hunger so violent it made sleep impossible. He stole food, not out of rebellion but out of desperation. An apple here, a sandwich there, just enough to keep the dream alive. He knocked on studio doors, auditioned endlessly. Some say it was more than 100 rejections. Each one a dagger, each one a reminder that the world did not believe in him. His accent was mocked. His English stumbled. His body was flawless, but his voice was foreign. And yet every morning he trained, he stretched, he split, he whispered, "Thank you in advance for my success." Madness, perhaps, but belief was all he had. He worked wherever he could, pizza delivery, parquet flooring, limousine driving, bouncer at Woody's Wharf, Chuck Norris's bar. The irony stung, protecting strangers at night while dreaming of fighting villains on screen. Still, he kept showing up. Kept offering his fists and his smile, certain that one day someone would notice. In 1984, he flickered briefly across the screen in Breakin', a background dancer whose splits went unnoticed. That same year, he joined Chuck Norris's stunt team in Missing in Action. It paid almost nothing, but it proved he could bleed for the camera. Then came No Retreat, No Surrender in 1986. A small role, a villain, but it was a name, a face. A victory that tasted like sunlight after years of rain. He was no longer a hungry boy in the back of a car. He was on screen. These years were not glamorous. They were brutal. Poverty, humiliation, the crushing loneliness of exile. But from the depths of that struggle emerged the grit that would later make him the muscles from Brussels. Every rejection was a wound. Every night in that car a scar. And yet each one stitched into the fabric of a legend in the making. Then, in 1988, the world finally looked his way. Bloodsport hit the screen, and with it, Jean-Claude Van Damme erupted into legend. On screen, he was Frank Dux fighting in a hidden tournament. But in truth, he was fighting for every cold night, every slammed door, every insult that said he was invisible. Made for just $1.5 million, the film ignited into a global sensation. The Immigrant with Broken English became the obsession of action cinema. When Bloodsport came out, I cried, he later confessed, because the little boy in Belgium was finally seen. When Bloodsport exploded onto screens in 1988, it didn't just launch a career, it detonated a legend. Jean-Claude Van Damme, the Immigrant with Broken English and ballet forged balance, became the face of a new kind of hero, graceful, brutal, vulnerable, unstoppable. The boy who once slept in a car was now the man who made the world hold its breath. Kickboxer followed in 1989, and with it came the image that would define a generation, Van Damme, shirtless, dancing in drunken rhythm before unleashing a split kick so precise it felt like poetry. The film turned a modest budget into a $50 million triumph. Audiences didn't just watch him, they worshipped him. Then came the cascade. Lionheart 1990, a street fighter with a wounded heart, proving Van Damme could carry both fists and feeling. Death Warrant 1990, a prison thriller that cemented his status as a box office draw. Double Impact 1991, Van Damme vs. Van Damme, twin brothers, twin fury. A dazzling showcase of his range and charisma. Universal Soldier 1992, a brutal clash with Dolph Lundgren, thunderous action that roared past $100 million worldwide. Hard Target 1993, directed by John Woo, it fused Hong Kong flair with Van Damme's raw magnetism. Time Cop 1994, The Summit, a sci-fi thriller that broke $100 million and proved he wasn't just a fighter, he was a leading man. Even video games bowed to his aura. Mortal Kombat's Johnny Cage was modeled after him, his initials, his swagger, his splits. Van Damme wasn't just starring in Hollywood, he was reshaping it. But fame, like fire, burns indiscriminately. The dream that had once lifted him from hunger and humiliation now chained him in golden shackles. I was working too much, he later admitted. Flying from set to set, exhausted. I couldn't see my family. Stardom had saved him once, but now it was devouring him piece by piece. City after city blurred into one endless set. Applause echoed louder than his own heartbeat. Behind the million-dollar smile, his eyes darkened with shadows no makeup could hide. At home, the cheers of millions could not fill the silence of his own dinner table. Empty chairs spoke louder than any ovation. The man who had once fought for visibility now found himself invisible in the lives that mattered most. Fame had lifted Jean-Claude Van Damme from hunger and humiliation. But now it was the very thing unraveling him. The man who once danced through kicks with ballet-born grace was now staggering through life, bruised not by villains on screen, but by the weight of his own legend. The schedule was relentless. Film after film, city after city. Applause louder than his own heartbeat. He was working too much, flying from set to set, exhausted. I couldn't see my family, he admitted. Stardom had saved him once, but now it was devouring him. Behind the million-dollar smile, his eyes darkened. Makeup could hide bruises, but not the shadows. The cheers of millions could not fill the silence of his own dinner table. 5 marriages collapsed under the weight of absence. Children grew up in the echo of his fame, not the warmth of his presence, and so he turned inward. To silence the ache, he reached for escape. Cocaine, alcohol, pills, not to party, but to numb. I was doing 10 grams of cocaine a day, he later confessed. The fighter who once trained through hunger now fought through haze. The man who once split his legs with precision now split his life into fragments he could no longer hold together. Scandals followed. Tabloids feasted. The same press that once crowned him now carved him apart. He was mocked, dismissed, labeled a burnout. The immigrant who had once been told he would never belong was now told he had overstayed his welcome. But Van Damme did not vanish. He did not hide. He entered rehab, faced his demons, spoke openly about bipolar disorder, about the darkness that had stalked him for years. He did not pretend. He stood, trembling but truthful, and said, I am not perfect, but I am still fighting. And then, in 2008, came JCVD, a film unlike any he had ever made. He played himself, not the hero but the man, stripped of glamour, drenched in regret. In one haunting monologue, he spoke directly to the camera, tears streaming, voice cracking, confessing the pain behind the persona. It was not acting. It was revelation. Critics were stunned. Audiences wept. The fighter had become philosopher. The icon had become mirror. And in that moment, Jean-Claude Van Damme reclaimed something far more precious than fame. He reclaimed himself. By the late 1990s, Jean-Claude Van Damme was no longer just a star, he was a paradox. To the world, he was still the muscles from Brussels, the man whose kicks could shatter bones and whose splits defied gravity. But behind the cameras, he was unraveling. The man who once fought poverty with discipline and humiliation with belief was now fighting himself. The collapse of his marriage to Darcy Lapierre and the loss of custody of his son Nicholas left a wound deeper than any injury he had ever sustained. "Not seeing my son, it broke me," he admitted years later, his voice cracking with the weight of regret. For a man who had survived hunger, exile, and ridicule, this was the blow that truly shattered him. He could break bricks with a single kick, but he could not break the wall that now stood between him and his boy. And into that silence, addiction crept. Cocaine became his refuge, his escape. At his worst, he confessed to using up to 10 grams a day. Nights blurred into mornings, mornings into nights, champagne and powder replacing the discipline that had once defined him. The fighter who once trained through hunger now numbed himself through haze. The man who once split his legs with precision now split his life into fragments he could no longer hold together. Hollywood whispered, late arrivals, missed calls, on-set fatigue that no stunt could disguise. The tabloids feasted, painting him as a fallen idol, a cautionary tale. The immigrant who had once been mocked for his accent was now mocked for his collapse. The boy who had once prayed in a Belgian church to be seen was now seen only as spectacle. But beneath the chaos, a darker truth lingered. Van Damme was not only battling addiction, he was battling his own mind. Diagnosed later with bipolar disorder, he revealed that the storms inside him had been raging for years, long before the world noticed. The manic highs that fueled his relentless training, the crushing lows that left him hollow. These were battles no choreography could script, no spotlight could soften, no applause could ever help him win. And yet, even in the abyss, he refused to surrender. He entered rehab, faced the truth, spoke openly about his struggles, shattering the illusion of invincibility he had once embodied. "I am not perfect," he said, "but I am still fighting." It was not the voice of a star, it was the voice of a survivor. And in 2008, he would bare his soul in a way no one expected. In JCVD, he played himself, not the hero but the man. Stripped of glamour, drenched in regret, trembling with truth. In one haunting monologue, he looked directly into the camera, tears streaming, voice cracking, confessing the pain behind the persona. It was not performance. It was confession. It was revelation. Critics were stunned. Audiences wept. For the first time, the world saw not the muscles, not the myth, but the man. And in that moment, Jean-Claude Van Damme began his redemption. By the early 2000s, Jean-Claude Van Damme was no longer the box office king he once was. The tidal wave of fame that had carried him through the late 80s and early 90s had receded, leaving behind the wreckage of broken marriages, estranged children, and a reputation scarred by addiction. Hollywood had moved on. Younger stars filled the screens. The man once called the muscles from Brussels was now whispered about as a relic, but Van Damme was not finished. He had been counted out before, as a boy mocked for his glasses, as an immigrant sleeping in a car, as an actor rejected 100 times. Each time he had risen, and now, once again, he began the slow, painful climb. He returned to what had always saved him, discipline. Training became his sanctuary, meditation his medicine. He spoke openly about his bipolar disorder, refusing to hide the storms inside him. "I am not perfect," he admitted, "but I am still fighting." These words, stripped of bravado, carried more weight than any roundhouse kick. In 2008, he stunned the world with JCVD. Playing himself, not the hero but the man, he bared his soul on screen. In a raw, unbroken monologue, he confessed his failures, his regrets, his exhaustion. Tears streamed, his voice cracked. It was not performance, it was confession. Critics hailed it as the role of his life. For the first time, audiences saw not the myth but the man. and they loved him for it. From there, a quieter career emerged. He returned to action films, yes, but with humility. He lent his voice to animation, Kung Fu Panda 2, embraced self-parody, JCVD, Jean-Claude Van Johnson, and even returned to the big screen alongside Stallone, Schwarzenegger, and Lundgren in The Expendables 2. No longer the lone star, he was now part of a brotherhood of warriors who had defined an era. But perhaps his greatest redemption was not on screen. It was in his family. He reconciled with Gladys Portugues, the woman who had once been his anchor. They remarried in 1999, divorced again in 2015, but found their way back once more. Through all the storms, she remained the constant, the reminder of the man he had once been and the man he still could be. His children, too, became part of his healing. Christopher and Bianca followed him into the world of fitness and film, carrying his fire forward. Nicholas, though distance had scarred their bond, remained the wound that taught him the true cost of fame. Today, Van Damme lives not as the untouchable star of the 90s, but as something rarer, a survivor. He trains daily, meditates, and speaks of peace more than power. He has become philosopher as much as fighter, reminding the world that strength is not in muscles, but in the will to rise after every fall. The boy who once prayed in a Belgian church for 3 impossible wishes, to save the world, to protect nature, and to become a movie star, may not have saved the world. He may not have protected nature, but he did become a star. And more than that, he became proof that even broken men can rise again. By the time the world rediscovered Jean-Claude Van Damme through JCVD, something had shifted. The man who once embodied invincibility on screen had embraced vulnerability as his truest strength. He was no longer just the fighter who split mountains with his legs. He had become the philosopher who stitched wounds with his words. Van Damme began to speak less about stardom and more about survival. He talked openly about bipolar disorder, about the manic highs that fueled his training and the crushing lows that nearly destroyed him. He admitted his mistakes, his addictions, his betrayals, his absences as a father. And in doing so, he gave permission for others to admit theirs. He became a teacher, not in classrooms, but in interviews, gyms, and quiet conversations. He spoke of meditation, of balance, of the need to train not only the body, but the mind. The muscles are nothing without the spirit, he would say. For a man once defined by his physique, this was a revelation. His philosophy was simple but profound: discipline is freedom. The same discipline that saved him as a boy in Brussels still saved him now. Vulnerability is strength. To admit weakness is not to surrender, it is to survive. Reinvention is eternal. Every collapse is a chance to rise again. He became a mentor to younger fighters and actors, reminding them that fame is not salvation but a test. He urged them to protect their families, their health, their souls, lessons he had learned through scars. And yet, he never abandoned the fighter within. He still trained daily, still stretched into splits, still carried the fire of the boy who once prayed in a Belgian church. But now the fire burned differently, not to conquer the world, but to illuminate it. In his later years, Van Damme embraced humility. He laughed at himself, parodying his own legend in commercials and shows like Jean-Claude Van Johnson. He lent his voice to animated films, delighting children who had never seen Bloodsport. He returned to the screen in The Expendables 2, standing shoulder to shoulder with the very icons he had once rivaled. But his greatest role was no longer on screen. It was in life itself. He had become a symbol, not of perfection, but of persistence, not of invincibility, but of endurance, not of glory, but of grace. Jean-Claude Van Damme, the boy once mocked as 4 Eyes, the immigrant who slept in a car, the star who lost himself in fame, had become something greater than any role he ever played. He had become proof that survival is sacred. At 63, Jean-Claude Van Damme no longer chases the blinding glare of premieres or the endless grind of back-to-back blockbusters. The man who once lived in airports, hotel rooms, and film sets now wakes to something rarer: stillness. His mornings are not filled with the roar of cameras, but with meditation, stretching, and the discipline that has always been his salvation. The body that once seemed carved from steel now carries the weight of years, but it also carries wisdom. His kicks may not split the sky as they once did, but his spirit remains unbroken. He trains not to prepare for the next role, but to preserve the rhythm of survival. Each stretch, each breath, each movement is a prayer, a reminder that discipline is not just for the body, but for the soul. His empire, estimated at $40 million, is not just measured in dollars. It is measured in endurance. In the decades of films that still play on screens across the world. In the viral Volvo commercial that reminded millions that the legend still lived. In the statues that stand in Brussels and beyond, honoring not just the fighter, but the symbol. But his truest wealth is not in contracts or trophies. It is in reconciliation. In the fragile but enduring bond with Gladys Portugues, the woman who became his lighthouse. In the laughter of his children, Christopher and Bianca, who carry his fire forward. In the humility of a man who once thought himself invincible, now admitting that survival is not about perfection, but persistence. Van Damme has become more than an action star. He has become a teacher of resilience. His openness about bipolar disorder, his honesty about addiction, his willingness to laugh at himself, all of it has transformed him from idol into mirror. Fans no longer look at him as untouchable. They look at him as proof that even legends can break and still rise again. The boy who once prayed in a Belgian church for 3 impossible wishes, to save the world, to protect nature, and to become a movie star, may not have saved the world. He may not have protected nature, but he did become a star. And more than that, he became a survivor. Jean-Claude Van Damme's legacy is not just in the films that defined an era. It is in the truth he now embodies, that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to face it. That redemption is real. That even when the world counts you out, you can still rise. He is no longer just the muscles from Brussels. He is the quiet flame, the proof that even in the ruins of scandal, heartbreak, and despair, a man can stand again, not flawless, but unbroken. By the 2010s, Jean-Claude Van Damme was no longer just an action star. He had become something larger, something rarer, a cultural inheritance. His films still played on late-night television, his splits still went viral, his name still carried the weight of an era. But his true legacy was no longer confined to the screen. It lived in people. Every fighter who laces up gloves in a dimly lit gym, every dreamer who refuses to surrender after 100 rejections, every survivor who rises from addiction or despair, they all carry a piece of him. His story has become a map, a reminder that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to face it. His influence stretches across generations. In martial arts cinema, he remains a pillar. Without Van Damme, the bridge between Bruce Lee's philosophy and modern MMA-inspired action might never have been built. In popular culture, his image is immortal. From Mortal Kombat's Johnny Cage to viral commercials, his silhouette, legs split, arms steady, remains instantly recognizable. In mental health advocacy, his openness about bipolar disorder broke barriers. Fans who once saw him as untouchable now saw him as human, and in that humanity, they found hope. In family and forgiveness, his reconciliation with Gladys Portugues and his bond with his children showed that redemption is not just possible, it is worth fighting for. Statues of him stand in Brussels, Azerbaijan, Munich, not to celebrate scandal, but to honor resilience. They are not monuments to perfection, but to persistence. Proof that even when the world counts you out, you can still rise. And perhaps his greatest gift is not the films, not the fame, not the fortune. It is the permission he gives others to stumble, to break, to fall, and still to rise again. Jean-Claude Van Damme is no longer just the muscles from Brussels. He is the rhythm of resilience, the proof that even legends are human and that humanity itself can be legendary. Jean-Claude Van Damme's story is not just the tale of a man who rose from obscurity to global fame. It is the story of a boy mocked as 4 eyes, who turned humiliation into hunger, hunger into discipline, and discipline into destiny. It is the story of an immigrant who slept in cars, stole scraps of food to survive, and whispered impossible prayers in a Belgian church, only to one day see those prayers erupt into reality on the silver screen. But more than anything, it is the story of a man who fell, who stumbled into addiction, betrayal, scandal, and despair so deep that even he thought the fight was over. Who stood on the edge of surrender in a Hong Kong hotel room ready to let go. And yet, he did not. He rose again. That is why his legacy endures, not because of the box office numbers, though they were staggering, not because of the splits, though they remain unmatched, not even because of the films, though they defined an era. His legacy endures because he showed the world that even legends can break and still rise again. His immortality is not carved in marble statues, though they stand in Brussels, Munich, and beyond. It is not written in contracts or bank accounts, though his empire remains vast. His immortality lives in the people who carry his rhythm forward, in the fighter who trains through exhaustion, whispering, "One more round." In the dreamer who refuses to surrender after 100 rejections. In the addict who chooses recovery, one fragile day at a time. In the father who stumbles but still reaches for his children. In the man or woman who looks in the mirror and sees not perfection but persistence. Van Damme's story is a mirror. It reflects not the fantasy of invincibility but the truth of survival. He is not immortal because he never fell. He is immortal because he always rose. Even now, at 63, his body carries scars, his eyes carry shadows, but his spirit carries fire. He trains daily, meditates, and speaks of peace more than power. He has become philosopher as much as fighter, mentor as much as star. He laughs at himself, embraces humility, and reminds the world that strength is not in muscles, but in the will to endure. The boy who once prayed to save the world, protect nature, and become a movie star may not have saved the world. He may not have protected nature, but he did become a star. And more than that, he became a symbol. A living testament that redemption is real, that survival is sacred, and that even when the world counts you out, you can still rise. Jean-Claude Van Damme is no longer just the muscles from Brussels. He is the immortal rhythm of resilience, the proof that even legends are human, and that humanity itself can be legendary. And when the final curtain falls, it will not be silence. It will be symphony. Not applause for a performance, but gratitude for a life that proved survival is the greatest art of all. Jean-Claude Van Damme's journey no longer belongs only to him. It belongs to everyone who has ever been mocked, dismissed, broken, or forgotten, and still dared to rise. His story has become a collective inheritance, a rhythm passed down to dreamers, fighters, and survivors across generations. The boy who once tied rubber bands around his shoes in Brussels now lives in the spirit of every child who feels too small, too weak, too invisible. His rise from ridicule to recognition is a reminder that humiliation can be fuel, that fragility can be forged into fire. The immigrant who once slept in a car in Los Angeles now lives in the spirit of every outsider who arrives in a new land with nothing but a dream. His survival through hunger and rejection is proof that belief, even when it borders on madness, can carry you through the darkest nights. The star who once lost himself to addiction and despair now lives in the spirit of every soul who has stumbled into shadows. His confession of weakness, his openness about bipolar disorder, his willingness to admit he was not invincible, these became lifelines for others. He showed that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to face it. And the father who once wept for the children he could not hold now lives in the spirit of every parent who has stumbled, failed, and still reached for reconciliation. His return to Gladys, his bond with Christopher, Bianca, and Nicholas, is proof that love, though fractured, can endure. Van Damme's legacy is not just in the films that defined an era, Bloodsport, Kickboxer, Universal Soldier, Timecup. It is in the way those films became metaphors for life itself. Every fight scene was not just choreography, it was prophecy. A reminder that the greatest battles are not fought in tournaments or on screens, but in silence within the self. Today, statues of him stand in Brussels and beyond, not to celebrate perfection, but to honor persistence. Viral commercials, parodies, and self-deprecating humor have transformed him from idol into icon, from myth into mirror. He is no longer just the muscles from Brussels. He is the proof that even legends are human and that humanity itself can be legendary. Jean-Claude Van Damme's story is not finished. It lives in us. In every stretch, every split, every refusal to surrender, in every whisper of "I am still here." His immortality is not in marble or money. It is in motion, It is in memory, it is in us. Jean-Claude Van Damme's story is not simply the arc of a movie star. It is the odyssey of a man who has lived every extreme: poverty and fortune, obscurity and fame, triumph and collapse, despair and redemption. His life is not a straight line, but a circle of falls and risings, each one carving him deeper, each one proving that survival itself is the greatest art. The homes he owns in Los Angeles, Brussels, and Hong Kong are not just properties. They are monuments to survival. They are the answer to the boy who once shivered in the backseat of a broken car, stealing food to quiet the storm in his stomach. They are proof that the child mocked as 4 eyes built walls strong enough to withstand every storm. Yet Van Damme himself knows that marble and iron are not the true inheritance. The real legacy is invisible: discipline, resilience, humility, forgiveness. His body, once flawless under studio lights, now carries the lines of time. His joints ache, his muscles heal slower, his face bears the signature of survival. But those lines are not flaws, they are scripture. They are the record of a man who has lived, stumbled, fallen, risen, and endured. Legends may wrinkle, but they never fade. At home, his anchor remains Gladys Portugues, the woman he once lost, betrayed, and found his way back to. Together, they embody the truth that redemption is not a single act, but a daily choice. Their children, Christopher and Bianca, carry echoes of his fire, proof that legacy is not only in films or statues, but in blood, in laughter, in the continuation of spirit. And so, at 63, Van Damme speaks of legacy not in terms of millions, but in lessons. He wants his children to inherit not just wealth, but wisdom, that even the strongest warriors must bow to balance, that discipline is freedom, that vulnerability is strength, that forgiveness is survival. His days now are measured not by premieres, but by rhythm. Training sessions, quiet meals, walks with his dogs, appearances on screen not to prove he is immortal, but to remind us he is still here, still fighting, still standing. For fans, he is no longer just the muscles from Brussels. He is something greater, a testament that no matter how high you rise, no matter how far you fall, there is always a way to rise again. His wealth may be measured in millions, but his true riches are written in resilience, in forgiveness, in the family that chose to stay, and in the fact that after storms that would have destroyed anyone else, he is still standing. Jean-Claude Van Damme is not a relic of Hollywood's golden past. He is living proof that redemption, fragile but real, is always within reach. And when the final curtain falls, it will not be silence. It will be symphony. Not applause for a performance, but gratitude for a life that showed us the greatest battles are not won on screen, but in the silence of the human heart. Jean-Claude Van Damme's story no longer belongs only to him. It belongs to the millions who saw themselves in his struggle, his rise, his fall, and his resurrection. He is no longer just a man, nor even just a movie star. He has become an echo, an immortal rhythm that reverberates across generations. His films remain timeless not because of their budgets or scripts, but because of what they symbolized. Bloodsport was not just a martial arts tournament. It was the immigrant's fight to be seen. Kickboxer was not just revenge. It was the triumph of discipline over despair. Timecup was not just science fiction. It was the reminder that even heroes cannot outrun regret. Each role was more than entertainment. It was allegory. It was prophecy. And beyond the screen, his life became its own parable. The boy mocked as weak became the man who defined strength. The immigrant dismissed as foreign became the global icon. The addict dismissed as broken became the survivor who stood again. His story is not perfection, it is persistence. Not invincibility, it is endurance. Today, when fans watch his splits, his kicks, his piercing gaze, they are not just watching choreography. They are watching testimony. Proof that the human spirit, though fragile, can be forged into something unbreakable. Proof that even when the world counts you out, you can still rise. His legacy is not only in the statues that stand in Brussels, Munich, and beyond. It is in the gyms where young fighters whisper his name before stepping into the ring. It is in the living rooms where fathers and sons still watch Bloodsport together, passing down not just a film, but a fire. It is in the quiet resilience of those who, like him, have faced humiliation, hunger, heartbreak, and still dared to believe. Jean-Claude Van Damme is no longer just the muscles from Brussels. He is the eternal echo of resilience, The reminder that legends are not born, they are built, broken, and rebuilt again. And when the final curtain falls, his story will not end. It will live in every fighter who trains through pain, every dreamer who refuses to surrender, every survivor who whispers, "I am still here." Because Van Damme is not just history. He is inheritance. He is prophecy. He is the eternal warrior. Every legend has an ending, but not every ending is silence. Some endings echo forever, carried not in applause, but in memory and spirit in the lives they touched. Jean-Claude Van Damme's story is one of those. He began as a fragile boy in Brussels, mocked for his glasses, dismissed as weak. He became a fighter, a dreamer, an immigrant who slept in cars and stole food to survive. He rose to become a global icon, the muscles from Brussels, the man whose kicks split the sky and whose name lit marquees across the world. He fell into addiction, scandal, heartbreak, and despair so deep that even he thought it was the end. And yet, he rose again. That is the rhythm of his life. Rise, fall, rise again, not once, not twice, but endlessly. Each fall carving him deeper, each rise proving that survival is the truest strength. Today, his films remain, his statues stand, his fortune endures. But these are not his true legacy. His legacy is in the boy who trains through pain, whispering, "One more round." It is in the dreamer who refuses to surrender after 100 rejections. It is in the addict who chooses recovery, one fragile day at a time. It is in the father who stumbles, but still reaches for his children. Jean-Claude Van Damme's greatest role was never Frank Dux, Kurt Sloan, or Max Walker. His greatest role was himself, the eternal warrior who proved that the most heroic act is not victory but survival. And so, when the final curtain falls, it will not be silence, it will be symphony. Not applause for a performance, but gratitude for a life that showed us the truth, that legends are not born flawless. They are born fragile. They stumble, they break, they bleed. And in rising again, they become immortal. Jean-Claude Van Damme is not just a man, not just a star, not just the muscles from Brussels. He is the eternal flame, the echo that will never fade, the proof that even when the world counts you out, you can still rise.